Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Today's episode is sponsored once again by Podcorn. Like many new podcasters, when we launched Locations Unknown, we had no idea if anyone would even listen. Now that we are gaining traction, we had to find sponsors for our show. For that, we use Podcorn. Podcorn is a marketplace that connects podcasters like us to amazing sponsorship opportunities. Podcorn's mission is to give podcasters transparency, creative freedom, and full control over how and when they monetize. If you are ready to start making money on your podcast, then check them out at podcorn.com. That's PODCORN.com.
Thousands of people have mysteriously vanished in America's wilderness. Join us as we dive into the deep end of the unexplainable and try to piece together what happened. You are listening to Locations Unknown.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Locations Unknown. I'm your co-host, Joe Irado, and with me, as always, is a guy who can eat Captain Crunch and not cut the roof of his mouth, Mike Vandebogart.
Thanks, Joe. Welcome back, everyone, to the Locations Unknown podcast. Don't really have any updates for you guys this week, but if you want to support the show, head over to our Facebook page and check out our hats and stickers. The hats look really good when you're out on the trail, and, what makes a car look better than a giant bumper sticker on the back of it? So head over to our Facebook store.
I get asked all the time because the hats are cool and people don't know what it is, so you can be unique.
They are cool.
Until we blow up, and then you won't be unique anymore.
Yeah, and I think at some point we're planning to get some shirts made, so stay tuned.
Yeah, I should look into that.
Yeah.
I'll eventually get to that.
Probably not.
All right, and we'd also like to shout out to Flavio and Katie Rover Tony right in our hometown of Milwaukee. They're huge fans of the show, and just like last episode, we're just going to start giving shout outs to fans. So interact with us on Facebook, and you might hear your name called off on an obscure podcast, so that's pretty neat.
It's a big honor.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, let's gear up and get out to explore Locations Unknown. October 2nd, 1999. 3-year-old Jaryd Atadero and his 6-year-old sister Jocelyn, as well as 11 other adults, were hiking the Big South Trail near Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. While hiking, Jaryd ran ahead no more than 100 feet and stopped to talk with some fishermen. After his brief time, Jaryd continued down the trail ahead of the group. This would be the last time anyone saw Jaryd. In the following days, a massive search and rescue operation failed to turn up any evidence. Join us this week as we piece together the tragic disappearance of Jaryd Atadero and the discovery years later that deepened the mystery. The Big South Trail is an 11-mile trail located at 8,440 feet in the rugged Comanche Peak Wilderness. And this is part of the Arapaho and Roosevelt National Forest. So it kind of sits in between them in different areas, eventually crossing into Rocky Mountain National Park. So it's actually kind of like a trifecta of national forests and parks.
Yeah, and Joe, you've hiked in Rocky Mountain National Park before, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been there a lot of times. We've talked about it on the show. I don't think I've been to either of these three areas, but from the sound of it, it's something I'd want to go to because they have a few 14ers in there that I'll get at in some of the location profile, but they seem close together, which is not always common in the Rockies. So that's really nice for mountaineers that, like me, who live in Wisconsin. Say me and Mike want to go out and climb a mountain. Well, we have the opportunity to do maybe a few of them in one trip instead of having to do one at a time.
Yeah.
So that's nice. But what we'll do is I'll talk a little bit about the state and the region. So this area is 723,000 acres. So that's 1,131 square miles. So it's a pretty big area, especially for a young toddler going missing that can barely talk, being 3 years old.
It's a rugged area too. Anyone who's hiked in the Rockies, it's pretty rugged. So yeah, it's, the trails are pretty difficult.
Yeah, you know what? When you really think about it, because I've gone there a bunch, and I know you've been there. It always seems, especially when you go on like the trail apps, I use All Trails. It always seems like they're not so bad, and it's a mix of the altitude, and it's totally deceiving because they're not really aggressive, but it is so rocky that when you're going on them, it just takes a lot out of you, a lot more than you usually think.
Well, and then you never think like, okay, 2,000 foot elevation gain doesn't seem like a lot, but you're already at 10,000 feet and you got 40 pounds on your back. It adds up quickly.
Absolutely. So here's just some fun information about the Arapahoe National Forest. It was established by Theodore Roosevelt, who's one of my favorite presidents because he was insane, literally. And there's some really cool stories. I just love the history of Theodore Roosevelt. My favorite one is when he commandeered some ships to go fight. Was it on Cuban shores? Like they told him he couldn't attack, and he and his Rough Riders. Yeah. It was because he was leading the Rough Riders, and they told him that they weren't going to attack, and he said like basically screw you, stole 3 ships and went and attacked, and won.
He was a pretty badass president.
Oh yeah, exactly. He was just insane, and yeah. I mean, he hunted everything, and he was just a cool president. So it was established by him on July 1st, 1908. And the Roosevelt National Forest, originally part of the Medicine Bow Forest Reserve, was the first named Colorado National Forest in 1910, and then was renamed by President Herbert Hoover to honor Theodore Roosevelt in 1932. So it didn't start out as his, but in 32 they renamed it to Theodore Roosevelt. The Pawnee National Grassland was transferred to the Forest Service from the Soil Conservation Service in 1954, and it was designated a national grassland in 1960. And that's not the Pawnee from Parks and Recreation, just FYI. It is not. The highest point in that area is Gray's Peak at 14,278 feet. And like I said at the beginning, there's 3 other 14ers in that area, as well as 12 other peaks that are over 13,000. So this is a fairly aggressive area of Rocky Mountain National Park. And
between that and the forest,
go ahead.
yeah. Oh, no, I was to say Gray's Peak, so those peaks that you mentioned are actually in the forest area, so they're not even in Rocky Mountain National Park.
Oh, that didn't, okay.
Yeah.
I think I got that confused.
Yeah, the forest area, I believe, is north of Rocky Mountain National Park, but they're close.
Okay. I don't even care. I just want to go climb all those mountains. So, and a fun fact, a good portion of the story for the 1984 film Red Dawn, featuring Patrick Swayze, was set in the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest. So that was one of my favorite movies as a kid, honestly, which is kind of funny. And Mike, did you know, here's another fun fact that I actually just know off the top of my head. Red Dawn is the first feature film to be given a rated R rating.
Really?
So that's when the MPAA ratings came out, and that was the first movie that was rated R.
I did not know that. That's how I know you're a true fan of the film.
I know, right?
Interesting.
I just know lots of great facts about Red Dawn. So that's it. That's all I know. The climate for that area, average temps range from a high in the upper 60s, that's Fahrenheit, in July, to lows in the teens during the winter months. So it's not too crazy, I guess I would say. It's not warm or significantly cold, but it can be bad. Yeah. And the park has a reputation of extreme weather events due to the complex interactions of elevations. So whenever you have a storm roll up, it's probably gets pretty crazy as far as blizzard conditions go. I know I've experienced that before where it's like not super cold, but that snow comes in and it, like the winds start coming in and whipping, and it can be awful.
Well, yeah, it's kind of that part of the Rockies are kind of at a point in the U.S. where you've got, warm air coming up from Mexico, and you've got a lot of different air masses kind of converging, so it creates some really crazy weather in that area of Colorado.
Yeah, it's like uniquely positioned where warm air meets cool air, like for the first time, and it's before it starts rolling up north or going down south, and that's where you get that real imbalance.
Yeah, and then you add in the terrain, so you've got these really high mountains kind of funneling the air around too, so it creates some really crazy weather. And Joe, like you said, you've experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, there's a cool, I have a time-lapse video from the last trip I took of a storm literally hitting, and now I'm forgetting what mountain we were on, but we were like on the other side of a ridge, and you could see a storm cloud hit the mountain and basically like tumble over itself. So like we didn't get hit with the storm because it was on the other side, but it's just crazy how to think like the mountains are so high up, they affect the weather just by their features, essentially.
Yeah.
So types of dangers outside of the exposure that we already talked about, there's not really much. I mean, there's moose, black bear. With a child 3 years old, I'd say the biggest thing I would be concerned about would be the mountain lions. That would be the biggest thing I'd be worried about, because those are every year you're hearing about a kid or even some like adolescent children getting taken by the lions if they're like straggling from a group.
Interesting fact, though, when I was researching this case, there's only been 14 reported deaths by mountain lions since like 1905.
Oh, wow.
In North America. So while attacks on people from mountain lions are a little more common, actually being killed by one is extremely rare.
That's really comforting, actually, just because like I'm always thinking about that when I bring my kids out.
Yeah.
So that's good.
It's an interesting fact. So just a random fact.
No, that's good. That's good, because it always seems like, it's the news and they're good at sensationalizing things. But every year there's like 3 that you hear about, and sometimes it's even adults. Yep. So it just makes you terrified that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I'd say the last thing, like we kind of said, outside of those things, exposure and altitude sickness. You heard how many peaks there are. A lot of areas over 10,000 feet. That's kind of where you start getting into that, where altitude can affect you. You're above the tree line at like 11,000 to 12,000. So there's no shelter. So I didn't do any of the research on this one. So Mike, you're telling the story, so you'll explain where they were. I doubt they had a 3-year-old hiking for too long over tree line, but.
Yeah, so the trail they were hiking on definitely was below the tree line, and we'll kind of get into, as we go into the timeline, I'll kind of get into the trail area a little bit, but just picture, below the tree line trail in the Rocky Mountains. It's, rugged, some good elevation gain. There's going to be some rivers and, things like that. So for an adult, a decent trail, but, definitely it'd be tough for a little kid. And some of the interviews that they did with some local people in the area kind of expressed that they were a little shocked that someone would let their 3-year-old kid kind of go on this trail just because it's a more strenuous trail for even adults.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right. Tell me about Jaryd, and then we'll get into the timeline, because I'm very eager to hear the story now.
Jaryd Atadero was your typical 3-year-old boy. He had no medical conditions that are known. He was 3 years old at the time of his disappearance. Today, he would be 24. I don't know his height and weight. That wasn't reported at the time.
Just
but
average 3-year-old boy height and weight?
Average 3-year-old boy height and weight. From the pictures, he looks like a real healthy little kid. He had kind of brown, dark hair. The clothing he was last seen in was a long-sleeved, kind of green and beige fleece coat, royal blue sweatpants, and kind of white-gray tennis shoes. He had absolutely no survival gear on him. I mean, he's a 3-year-old kid. So going out into the wilderness in those clothes, even in the mountains, I mean, it's October. So there wouldn't be a very good chance for him to survive long in that environment on his own.
Yeah. And he's 3 years old. So, I mean, he's entirely dependent upon adults. Absolutely.
Yeah. And personality, I picked up through all the research I did that he was just kind of an adventurous, 3-year-old kid. Okay. He kind of grew up in the mountains with his dad and sisters. So
All right, so he's from the area, so we could argue that altitude shouldn't play too much of a role.
Yeah.
And so he grew up in the area. What else? So he doesn't have any type of mental deficiency or anything like that. So he's from health records
at
wise,
least,
he's fairly
nothing
normal.
that's publicly been made available. So everything I could find, healthy, normal 3-year-old kid.
Okay.
Experience in the wilderness. So this is a weird one. We usually like to kind of profile the person that went missing, kind of what kind of experience they had.
Mm-hmm.
Being a 3-year-old kid, he has no survival experience. He's a 3-year-old kid.
Well, I'd say no survival experience, but I'd be interested to know if they live in a wooded area or a mountainous area. So like if he's normally playing in that condition, because that would make, and I'm assuming here just based off the intro that I read,
Yep.
that would make more sense for why he was kind of wandering. If that's something that happened all the time and it was very normal versus like my kids would never be wandering there ever.
That's a good point. His dad owned a resort about 15 miles away in the mountains. So I think it's safe to assume that Jaryd in his, short life grew up in the mountains. So that's probably why he was so comfortable just kind of running down the trail. It's just another day playing outside for him.
Sure. Yeah. Cause you think about I think about I can only compare to my kids.
Yeah.
And if we're in an area that they're not familiar with, they're not going too far out of my sight, even if they're kind of trying to goof around because they get scared. But if he's extremely comfortable in that environment, I could see him just going off and being used to it.
Getting into some of the characters we're going to talk about in this case. So obviously we have Jaryd. He's the missing 3-year-old. We have Jaryd Atadero. He's the father of Jaryd. We have Jocelyn. She's the sister of Jaryd. We have Rob Osborne and Gareth Watts. These are two hikers that I'm not going to spoil it for you just yet, but these two hikers...
They're involved in the story in some way?
They're involved in the story later on.
Okay.
We have Butch Schoening. He's a friend of Alan that worked at the resort during the time of the disappearance. We have Bill Nelson, who, as of today, is retired, but at the time he was the Larimer County undersheriff.
Okay.
We have Jane, now I'm going to butcher this name, Zamjewski. She was one of the county search and rescue people, and she was...
I bet you ignore the Z and it's Majewski. That's my guess.
Maybe.
That's my guess,
right.
And the Z is silent.
Right. She was on one of the K9 units, and obviously we do have some quotes on this case from my favorite survival expert, Les Stroud.
Awesome. And so you're saying we actually have comments from somebody who ran the K9 team?
She, I don't know if she ran it. She was on the K9 team.
Okay, but that'll be cool because I think this is the first time we have a firsthand eyewitness account from somebody who worked with the dogs. Because it's always us talking to people who know about them, but no one that was actually assigned to the team or on one of the teams. So, that's cool.
The thing about this case is the timeline of events is so well documented. When I was researching this, it's almost down to the hour of kind of what happened. So once I get into the timeline in a few minutes, you'll see some of our cases. The timeline is hazy. You don't really know when things happen, but this one it's pretty clear cut when things happened. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Before we get into the timeline, if you are looking to monetize your podcast and have no idea where to start, check out Podcorn. Podcorn is a marketplace that connects podcasters like you with sponsors to start making some sweet, sweet coin on your show. With Podcorn, there is no middleman. Podcasters of all sizes can browse and choose opportunities right on the platform. Users set their own rates and collaborate with the brands directly without exclusivities. Podcorn helped us monetize Locations Unknown, and we know they can help you too. Check out the marketplace at podcorn.com. That's PODCORN.com.
To jump right into it, it's October 2nd, 1999. Alan and his two kids, 3-year-old Jaryd and 6-year-old Jocelyn, were staying at the Poudre River Resort, which was owned by Alan and his brother Arlen. Alan, in several interviews, talked about how he was attracted to the canyon. He liked being out in the trees and just kind of being out in the wild. And I equate this to how people in Wisconsin always go up north on the weekends. They have a house on a lake somewhere and they relax. So
sure. So this guy's like living his dream. Like he loves the mountains. He opens up a resort there so he can basically live where he wants to and work there at the same time.
Yeah, him and his brother own this little resort, and it sounds like a pretty cool place. They would wake up in the morning. They would close the resort at 11 o'clock at night. They didn't have a care in the world. Even if they're working, they were together. Their family was together 24/7. So that's what they really enjoyed. In this fall time, there was a Christian singles group that was staying at the lodge, and they weren't paying any rent at the lodge, but they're helping Alan prepare for winter. So, and apparently
so they like worked off their bill.
Yeah, and apparently Alan knew a lot of these people in the group, and I think his ex-wife was a member of the group. I read that in one of the articles.
That's not awkward at all.
Yeah, so this whole timeline starts when the group wanted to go hiking around this trout farm, which was like 1.5 miles away from the resort. Alan, thinking that they were going to the trout farm, was cool with his 2 kids going with them. And he thought, I know some of these people in the group.
Okay, so it wasn't a group of strangers he sent his kids off with. He knows these people and they've been living there for a while.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So he thought they were just going like 1 mile down the road to this trout farm. They're going to kind of stop around a bit and then they would be back. Like I said, it's October 2nd, 1999, so 10 a.m. in the morning. So 3-year-old Jaryd and his 6-year-old sister Jocelyn and 11 members of this Christian singles network leave the river resort. The dad thinks they're going to this trout farm 1.5 miles away, but for some reason, while en route to the trout farm, they decided to go 15 miles west of the resort to the Big South Trail that you mentioned in the beginning of your location profile.
And they didn't tell the dad that they made a 16 or 14 mile deviation from the plan?
They did not. And I wonder if Alan had known they were going to the Big South Trail originally, if he would have let his kids go. I'm guessing he wouldn't have.
I'm guessing I would agree with that, because if he really knows that mountain well, and if what you're saying, what you said earlier, that people know this is a harder trail, he'd be like, no, you shouldn't go there. But if that group was not familiar with the area, maybe they thought they're just going to find a nicer spot.
Yeah. So, in several of the interviews, Alan talked about how he gave permission for Jaryd and Jocelyn to go under the assumption they're going to the trout farm. He talks about how Jaryd never liked to wear his shoes, so he kind of left his shoes untied. He goes into descriptions of kind of what kind of clothes he was wearing, just like I said in the character profile, the fleece jacket, the blue sweatpants, no survival gear.
Sure.
Bill Nelson, who is the undersheriff, we mentioned him in the character profile. He mentions that the church group went up to the Big South Trail. They parked at the trailhead, and then they started walking down the trail. This happens in big groups. Bill said the group started to separate, so some of the faster hikers kind of started moving forward, and some of the slower hikers were in the back. There was one adult with Jaryd and his sister at the time, and they seem to be hiking ahead of everybody else. I'm assuming, Jaryd is a little kid. He's kind of running down the trail, so the adult's trying to stay with him. This group of 11 plus Jaryd and Jocelyn are hiking down the trail, and Jaryd, Jocelyn, and one adult are kind of ahead of the pack, and everyone else is kind of lagging behind.
Sure.
Butch, which I mentioned earlier, he gives us a description of the Big South Trailhead, and this is where I was telling you earlier, Joe, I was kind of like, I don't know if I'd let a little kid hike this trail alone. Even that young, I don't know if I'd want him hiking with me either. But so Butch describes the trail as moderate, has ups and downs. He said you could take a kid on it as long as you kept the kid in line and hung on to him. He said there were some areas where the ledges were only 24 inches wide, and you'd lose shale all the way down to the river. So
what was the drop-off like?
They never mentioned how the drop-off, but
I guess for a 3-year-old, it doesn't matter. If it's a drop-off that goes to a river, if it's 5 feet or 10 feet, it's still...
Yeah. And, Butch goes on to say, he said, it's a moderate trail. It's pretty tough. He goes, if you're not in shape, it'll take a lot out of you. So, and he's referring to an adult. So being a 3-year-old...
Kids aren't in shape. They just can't be.
No. So, all right. So now we are fast forwarding to 11:30 a.m. So 2 fishermen about 1.5 miles up the trail from the main group see Jaryd and talk to him briefly. And this was near the Camp 2 site. It was reported that when Jaryd stopped and talked to the fisherman, he asked something about, are there bears in the area? The fisherman said, no, we haven't seen anything. And then, believing that Jaryd will soon be met by the group of people hiking behind him, they kind of just went back to fishing, and Jaryd just kept walking down the trail. So at this point, Jaryd is by himself. So between 10 a.m. and 11:30 a.m., Jaryd somehow got away from the adult and his sister and now was walking down the trail by himself. Reports from the sheriff's department say that it was unclear if Jaryd was between the two groups or ahead of the faster group when he met the fishermen. But the important thing to note here, these fishermen were the last people that saw Jaryd.
Okay.
So no one after 11:30 a.m. saw Jaryd again.
So the 11:30 time frame, that's when they said they talked to him, or that's when that group caught up to him and asked where like Jaryd was?
That was when the fishermen say they talked to Jaryd.
Okay, so he was alive and known where he was at 11:30.
Yeah. So approximately about 12:15 p.m., the hiking group realizes that Jaryd's missing, and they start searching for him for about an hour. Some members of the group returned to the River Lodge to alert Alan, and in one of the interviews, Alan was kind of napping, and they tell him, we have a situation, your son's not hurt, he's just missing.
Jeez. Trying to soften the blow of they freaking lost his kid.
He wakes up from his nap in a panic. He runs out to his car. He's like, where are you guys? Where was he? And they tell him, oh, we were 15 miles up the road at the Big South Trail. And he's like, how did you guys get that far up the road? Because remember, Alan the whole time thought they were hiking at this trout farm just a mile away. Alan's speeding up the road towards the trailhead. Some of the members of the group are still out there looking for Jaryd. Now, this is kind of strange. A couple of the people in the group, including Jaryd's sister, claim to have heard a scream. But when they were asked by law enforcement, was it a scream of panic? They said it sounded like like a scream of joy, like he was playing like with somebody, like a playful scream. But they never were able to actually verify if there was a scream or not. It's just kind of a weird thing to hear.
I think initially too, like, does he think he's playing hide and seek with these people? And you know what I mean? Like when you're a kid, you want to kind of give away your position. You make like a little noise. Possibly.
Maybe he was playing hide and seek with maybe the fisherman. Who knows? The fisherman didn't report any type of scream. So
yeah, I'm just saying in general, like a kid will just hide. Like a 3-year-old doesn't do things that are logical.
Bill Nelson, the undersheriff, we're going to mention him quite a bit in this timeline. In one interview, he goes on and kind of describes what happened at this point in time. He writes, as Jaryd, as a 3-year-old, is running and playing and having a good time, and I believe there was something 10 to 20 minutes worth of time that she lost track. And he's referring to the adult that was with them.
Sure.
He then goes on to say, the adult realized I haven't seen him for a while, and when they went up to try and find him, they kept going down the trail thinking they would catch up with him, and they never did. You know, it sounds like just an innocent mistake. I'm sure that the woman that was in charge of keeping track of him to this day probably never let herself live it down.
Yeah, unless she's like mentally unstable or something. But that would like ruin you.
And I think what probably makes it worse is it sounds like everyone in this group kind of knew each other and knew Alan, so they weren't just strangers. So that makes it harder. Fast forward to 4 p.m., so we're still on October 2nd. Alan had just spent the last couple hours up there at the trail. He was running down the trail. I remember one of the interviews said he was screaming his name, nicknames that he used to call him, just frantically trying to find him. He drives back down to the lodge to call 911, and he finds out that someone had already notified the searchers. So at 4 p.m. now, law enforcement has been notified that Jaryd's missing. So again, some of these cases, you can go a day or two before the person's reported missing. This was quick. He went missing about, they realized he was missing about 12:15 p.m. and law enforcement was notified at 4 p.m.
Yeah, I think too, like the age of the the subject is really what dictates that. Like if it's an adult, it's different. But if it's a 3-year-old kid and no one can find him, I think people mobilize pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine if you or I went missing, they'd probably be like, well, they could. Those two bozos can survive
how
in the
many
woods
times
for a
have
night.
how many times have you been like a few hours behind your arrival time? I mean, that's why anytime I leave my itinerary, I give a window of like 4 hours, because it's like you don't know what you're gonna go into. Sometimes if it's a new trail, you can kind of look at a topo map and look at the profile and guess. But if it's the first time you're doing it, you don't know what you're gonna run into.
It's always that like hiker's joke when, you're hiking up elevation on a trail and you're like, oh, just over that ridge will be done. And then you get over it. Oh, no, just over the next ridge and we'll be done. Like, it never ends.
What was it? Was it Mountain House Foods? One of the freeze-dried food companies puts those little quotes on the bottom. Yeah. And it was like the commandments of hiking. It's always farther than it seems. And never trust a fart, like things like that are written on the bottom.
Never trust a trail sign that has the mileage on it.
Oh, absolutely not ever. But yeah. Okay.
So 4 p.m. law enforcement is notified that Jaryd is missing. 4:26 p.m. an emergency pager alert is sent to the Laramie County Emergency Services Specialist Bill Nelson, the guy that we've been talking about.
Okay.
And I find it funny, an emergency pager alert.
They must have like a special system for unique search and rescue cases.
Some of the people listening might be too young to remember pagers, but they were a thing at one time.
Yeah.
So 5:07 p.m. now, a pager alert is sent to the county search and rescue manager, George Jansen. They said lag time here is standard procedure to allow mountain deputies to verify if a search is needed. They sometimes, I've read this before, they won't immediately send people out there. Like you said, Joe, sometimes people are, slow to come off a trail and people panic and think they're
they give it time to shake out.
Fast forward again now to 6:30 p.m. and search personnel reach the lower Big South Trailhead. And from reports I read at this time, they deployed around 65 search and rescue members, like trained people. So already within 4 or 5 hours, you've got a good sizable team of professionals out in the field searching.
Sure.
8 p.m. rolls around. Searchers from the lower and upper trailhead meet at campsites 7 and 8. No sign of Jaryd. The search teams plan to expand and bring in more resources, including a helicopter, which I'm going to get into in a second. We're moving into the next day, so now it's October 3rd, 1999. 7 a.m., we get a report that the overnight search team members are told to be extremely vigilant at dawn, as family members tell searchers Jaryd wakes up at dawn. They also deployed dive teams to the Big South River. So they had searchers out there at night even, stopping through the woods.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't stop. You got a 3-year-old kid in October in the Rockies at night. Like you're up against a clock of survival.
Yeah. It's going to be tough for a 3-year-old to, he could make it through the night. We don't know the weather conditions. I believe they were pretty calm weather conditions. There wasn't any snow or rain during the search. At least nothing came up in any of the reports that explicitly said that, there was heavy snow or heavy rain.
They couldn't do something as a result of weather or some other incident.
So 7 a.m. rolls around and an Air Force helicopter, a Huey UH-1N from F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, makes a first flight through the area and then heads to Fort Collins Loveland Municipal Airport to refuel. This helicopter refuels and then heads back out around 3:30 p.m. It gets out to the search area and then it starts struggling with the fuel load and mountain conditions and started stalling out. And it ended up falling 100 feet and then crashing up in the Big South Trail.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
they put too much fuel in for the lift.
That it didn't say, but I'm guessing by that they mentioned fuel load in mountain conditions that somebody miscalculated.
Yeah.
And there was too much weight and it couldn't get enough lift. On board the helicopter that crashed were 4 Air Force personnel and then Mark Sheets, who was a Loveland resident and he was one of the county's search and rescue members. The report goes on to say that Sheets was the only crew member not in a seat. He was actually on the floor with the door wide open, and he saw the rotors hit the tops of the trees and pieces of the helicopter spray into the forest. He tried to shut the door, but a severed tree limb came through and struck the Air Force doctor in the face, fracturing his eye socket. The copter ended up crashing, but all 4 of the Air Force crew were able to escape the helicopter. Sheets was trapped in it, and he was able to get pulled out of the copter, but he suffered some pretty severe injuries. He suffered a severe concussion, a 13-inch L-shaped gash that left his femur exposed. He also suffered 3 broken vertebrae in his lower back and a broken shoulder.
Wow.
So he was pretty torn up. Amazingly, everyone survived the crash. You'll learn later on in the timeline that because of this crash, they weren't able to search some of the areas where Jaryd was, that presumed to be. So,
oh, geez.
Yeah. So again, an issue early on in the search, affected their ability to search the full area. So it always seems to happen. I don't know why. Thankfully, everyone on the helicopter survived. So 6 p.m. rolls around. All 5 aboard the helicopter transported to the hospital, and they survived, but they all had significant injuries. So fast forward to October 4th. The search stretched into the 3rd day now. Searchers combed riverbanks.
I do want to say real quick, Mike, because I was just looking where that Air Force base is. I was thinking it was more mid.
Yeah.
It's near Cheyenne, which is just north of Denver. So
Okay.
they should totally know how to fly through the mountain.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe just somebody made a mistake.
Sure.
Didn't do their calculation correctly, or maybe there was a mechanical issue. The research I did didn't specify what actually happened to the helicopter, but
Okay.
so like I was saying, it's October 4th now, and the search stretched into the 3rd day. Searchers were combing riverbanks, up steep slopes. Dive teams peered into small pools left in the narrow, slow-moving rivers. They had a plane that was passing overhead. They had a llama helicopter, and I actually had to look this up. It's a real helicopter called a llama.
A llama helicopter?
Yeah. From a company called I'm butchering the name, but it was from a company based out of Fort Collins, and they joined searchers, but they were also encountering swirling winds that required full power to prevent crashing. So,
Oh, wow. So that's probably all those peaks that we were talking
Yep.
about causing all those issues.
yeah, so a second helicopter in the search almost crashed. So, like we were saying about weather conditions in the Rockies, they can get pretty gnarly in a hurry.
Yeah.
So, and another issue they were starting to have by the 4th was they had a lot of well-meaning but ill-equipped people trying to join in on the search. So,
Oh, so they're fighting off inexperienced quote-unquote searchers while trying to coordinate helicopters crashing, helicopters almost crashing, and look for this 3-year-old.
yeah.
So it's just a big cluster.
Yeah. So the sheriff's department mentioned in several articles I read that they really were having an issue with, these people were well-meaning. They really wanted to help, but they just weren't equipped. And we've talked about this in a lot of other episodes. You really got to come at these searches in a very systematic way so you don't disturb, the search area.
Sure.
Especially for canine units.
Well, and if you're not trained, you don't know what to look for.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when you're looking for certain things, especially for a small child in a big area, because, you've wandered off trail or gone with people that go off trail, like 20 feet off trail, you can all of a sudden lose sight of people, and that's an adult. So you have a kid wandering for 20 minutes, like without anyone watching him.
Yeah.
He could be anywhere.
The next couple of days, so October 5th through the 7th, more than 200 trained searchers, dozens of dog teams, professional trackers, a dive team, and a plane search for Jaryd without finding any solid clues. They've really thrown everything they had at it, and they are coming up with nothing. So
not even clothing,
nothing.
no
Yeah.
sign at all.
No tracks. There was mention from the undersheriff that some of the tracking dogs were picking up some, weird scents and kind of tracking in, certain areas, but I can get into that a little later.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just hit me. I'm like, we didn't talk about this canine person that you introduced in the beginning. So that's coming?
That's coming.
Okay, good.
October 8th, 1999, it's 7 p.m. the search for Jaryd is suspended due to lack of clues, and the family's notified. So he went missing midday on the 2nd, and the search lasted all the way through most of the day on the 8th. And then, at some point, resources are finite. They can't search indefinitely for him.
Well, and a kid that age is not living that long.
No one, a 3-year-old's going to have a tough time living that many days on his own out in the woods. So Bill Nelson,
especially in the mountains in October.
Yeah, exactly. So Bill Nelson, the undersheriff, kind of summed up the effort that they put into this. He said, "We worked for 8 solid days to begin with, and that was 24 hours a day for 8 days. We did some night searching. It was limited to a certain extent, but we always had people out in the field to make noise. So if somebody was out there now, Jaryd would have heard it. He would have maybe responded or went to." So, Bill is trying to say, we had people out there for 24 hours a day for 8 days straight.
Think about how hard it is to basically say you're giving up.
Mm-hmm.
Even though everybody knows that you're beyond a reasonable amount of time, how do you have to be the one to bear the weight of making the call of saying we're done?
Yeah. So Jane mentioned, I teased Jane. She actually made comments about the news media. So I don't remember this case back in 1999, but apparently it became a kind of a big nationwide story.
Mm-hmm.
Jane, who was on the K-9 unit, she said, "It was very intense, very media friendly. I mean, there was media, CNN, so it became a real nationwide episode. So that put a lot of stress on us and a lot of stress on the dogs." Other accounts of kind of the media being a kind of a pest to the searchers. The current county sheriff, Justin Smith, was a sergeant with the department during the search, for which he was the public information officer. He said the crash added to the stress of the search that only grew more frustrating as the national media took notice. He said there were TV trucks and newspaper reporters swarming the remote site after a grand jury in another chilling child case, the death of JonBenet Ramsey. I do remember that case.
Oh, that's probably why we don't remember this one, is because that one definitely eclipsed everything that was going on in the news. Yeah,
so the JonBenet Ramsey case, I remember, was all over the news at the time.
Oh, yeah.
The current sheriff said 17 satellite trucks at one time lined up Colorado Highway 14 with anchors and fur coats walking around, and anybody and everybody calling us for information. He also said psychics professed to know where searchers could find Jaryd.
Jeez.
A barefooted man with a mule showed up at the search site ready to track him down. And even an American Indian came to perform a ritual asking the mountain to give up the boy. So it kind of turned into a freak show towards the end of the search.
It turned into a circus.
Yeah.
That's just got to be infuriating and frustrating.
Yeah. So the original search ended on October 8th, and several years go by with no clues, no evidence. This area was heavily searched, and they found nothing. So fast forward to June 5th of 2003. This is where Rob and Gareth come into play. So who
Rob and Gareth were hikers, you said?
Yeah, these guys were kind of experienced backpackers that have hiked this area for many years. They're friends. They lived in the area. So Rob, now these are Rob's words. He writes, basically what we would do is pick an area we would like to hike and explore. And he's talking about Poudre Canyon. And he goes on to say, and so we went along the Big South Trail for the first time. Gorgeous hike, beautiful, beautiful river. This is really a wild area. And then Rob goes on to say, and the reason why Gary and I so much enjoy hiking together. So it's kind of like our group of friends. We like to hike together. So these guys have been doing it for years. Rob goes on to say, and then it was just coincidental that we wound up in a rock field and said, let's hike up that ridge. And I think it's about 2,000 foot hike up elevation to get to the top of it. But he goes, it's really remarkable country. Then Gareth goes, yeah, pretty much was like almost a scramble. So you're watching your feet, and basically you're just focused a few feet in front of you, your own feet, so you don't twist an ankle or something. So I've been on, hikes like that where it's like loose shale.
Oh yeah, you video from when we did that in Montana when we summited that mountain. I mean, it looked, and it wasn't that high up, but that scree was so bad it took way too long and was exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting because everything's moving under your feet, and you have to be really careful every step you take.
Well, yeah, it's like one step forward, half step back on every step.
And it takes an immense amount of concentration just so you don't slip and just go tumbling down. So that's what these guys are hiking up. So Rob goes on to say, we hiked that area a couple times before, and we had talked about the mystery of Jaryd, whether he had been swept downstream, abducted by a mountain lion, or if there had been something more sinister than that. This time we decided to go off trail, and we just walked right in, and we knew right away. Oh, they walked right in, and they found a shoe, like kind of lodged under a little outcropping for a rock. And Rob goes, we knew right away that it was probably Jaryd Atadero's clothes.
Oh, so they are aware that they were hiking an area where this kid went missing.
Yeah, so they mentioned a couple times that they hiked there and they kind of talked, like what happened to him, the theories they think might have happened.
Well, I mean, that's basically how the show started, is we'd always talk about that stuff and just said, hey, let's start recording it.
Right? Yeah. So the spot where they found the shoe was about 550 feet higher from Jaryd's last seen point. So pretty high up. And like we said, up a really rugged, loose rock, something that a 3-year-old's not going to be able to hike.
Well, or it will be very, and you get those scree fields, it's very visible.
Yeah.
It's not like wooded. So even if he was scrambling up this rock face during the search, you would have seen that.
Yeah. So Gareth goes on to describe the shoe. He goes, it was pretty pristine. It was like somebody had just took it off their right foot. It was fresh. I thought like I would see a kid standing in front of me. So I've seen pictures of these shoes. We'll post these on our Facebook page. The shoes look like they're fresh out of a box from the store.
Like not weathered at all?
Not weathered one bit for being up in the woods, the mountains for 3 years.
Jeez.
So Rob and Gareth continue to hike around that area, and they eventually find the other shoe, a brown fleece jacket, blue sweatpants turned inside out. And one pant leg was mostly scattered by birds that were using it as nesting material. So Rob and Gareth take photos. They leave everything untouched. They take photos of where they found everything. Then they picked up some of the clothing and they took it back down to the sheriff's office. And the sheriff's office emailed the photos to Alan, who confirmed that they looked like the clothes that Jaryd was wearing.
Oh, that's got to be awful.
Yeah.
I had a sick feeling in my stomach the entire time you're talking about how they're like uncovering the clothes and stuff, and you're just imagining this poor 3-year-old kid like scared, confused, not understanding what's happening. So that's just awful.
So the next day, we're talking June 6th of 2003. It took searchers about an hour to reach the site near campsite 2, where they found the remaining clothing scattered across a 20-foot area. Some of the items were sheltered from the elements and some were exposed. So they said while the cloth jacket had what appeared to be puncture marks and the pants were tattered, the nylon shoes had little weathering. So it's very puzzling why the shoes looked so pristine. I don't think you'll find out from the when we get into the theories. No one really knows why, and I think people are kind of they're conveniently leaving that out of their explanation for what happened to Jaryd.
Okay.
So it's now June 14th, and a team of Larimer County Sheriff's Office members and search and rescue members and the Colorado Division of Wildlife and Necro Search meet at the Big South Trailhead to start searching for remains of Jaryd. And later, Atadero and personnel from the local Child Protection Network join the group. So they're going back up there now to see if there's any other remains. They found the clothing and everything, but I think they were going up there to look for bones and things like that.
Yeah, just find the remains.
So 9:30 a.m. on the 14th, searchers hike in approximately 1.5 miles and make the 500-foot vertical climb up to the site where hikers had found the clothing. Now, it's about 11:30 a.m., and this is where it gets grisly. The searchers find a skull fragment, as they describe it as a skull cap, in a crevice and a tooth sitting on top of a log. And they said the skull was positioned in a way that would made it hard to see it from the air. You'd kind of have to be on the ground and looking at it from an angle.
Okay.
But it was like lodged in kind of a crevice. So, not easily, it wouldn't have been easy to get it in there. And then one single molar sitting on top of a log.
So are you thinking, and you don't have to answer now if you want to wait till we get the theories, but are you thinking like foul play, or are you thinking like he was climbing in there to like try and hide or get warm, or?
I don't know. I'll get to my theories in a few minutes.
Okay. I'll try. I just really want to get there, so I'll slow down.
Yeah. So we're wrapping up the timeline here. It's 5 p.m. now on the 14th. So that massive team of people that went looking for the remains, they get back down and they address the media at the trailhead and kind of announce what they found. So to recap, they found his fleece jacket, kind of tattered blue sweatpants, 2 pristine nylon shoes, a skull cap, and a single tooth. So
Jeez.
it's very very strange, to find just a single tooth and a skull cap.
Yeah.
You wonder what happened to the rest of him. We've got some comments from the sheriff's department after this second recovery mission. So Bill said, now these are exact words, "There were canine alerts that would go in that direction. Now, whether they were right at the scree field or before it, but they were at least alerting up the hill. That's why I'm reasonably certain we searched it, because when a dog alerts like that, we're thinking, okay, something must be up there. Let's go up there and search for it. But we never found anything." So that kind of leads me to think that this area where they found the tooth and the skull cap and the clothing was searched in the original search.
Yeah, and if he's still awake and moving, and it's not recovery at that point, that really shouldn't be an issue. Like we said on scree fields, like you can see people from a long ways away on those sides.
So, but now we have kind of conflicting information that came out of the official search and rescue report. They write, searchers on foot had never made it up to the 9,120 foot elevation at Jaryd's skull, where Jaryd's skull and tooth were found. The Air Force helicopter would have likely searched the area had it not crashed. So,
oh wow! So it could have possibly been an area that was supposed to get searched, and because the helicopter crashed, it was just completely overlooked.
that's what the report says, but you also have the undersheriff kind of conflicting with that, saying that they had canine alerts in that direction, and he believes it would have been searched. So, who do you believe? The official report, the undersheriff?
Well, I guess hope to God it's not one of those like he said, she said, he thinks she's doing something she's not.
Yeah.
And it's like what they trained us in for being a paramedic. When you're in a situation that's like chaotic and emergency, like the whole thing is, they teach us in CPR too. Like if somebody drops down, you're going to perform CPR and you notify somebody to call 911.
Yeah.
If you don't pick somebody out specifically and tell them to do it, like no one will do it because everyone thinks everyone else is doing it.
Yeah. That's interesting. And here's where our friend Les Stroud comes in. He kind of leads with a more mysterious outcome. He writes, "I think whatever's happening is beyond our understanding. In a lot of these cases, search and rescue or the volunteers searching have already gone over the certain areas, not once, not twice, but even dozens of times. And then the child is found there maybe a year, maybe a few years later." So I don't know what point he's trying to get at, but I think he's stressing that in a lot of these cases where they eventually find remains of these people, they've been searched multiple times.
Well, this is the second case that we've done that's happened.
Yeah. There was one question asked of Butch. So he was a friend of Alan and worked at the resort. They asked him, they said, "Is there any way Jaryd could have climbed up to that spot on his own?" He writes, "No way. Boy, that's a hard one. Not all the way. I couldn't see him going. He lived in a cabin. He's a 3-year-old. There's no way that would happen. I mean, it was a struggle for Gary and I to get there. very rough terrain. So,
and that's a guy who interacts with this kid every day, all summer long in mountainous regions. So it's like I would take his word over anyone else's.
Yeah. So, really strange case. There was a lot of weird theories. We can get into some of the official ones, or I don't know, Joe, if you've off the top of your head what you're thinking on this one.
I want to hear the official ones so that I can formulate my real opinion, because I'm kind of all over the place right now. So I want to get moved in one direction.
Okay, so Jane, who was on the K9 unit, she writes, "My conclusion was an animal encounter right at the beginning, and so I'm not sure officially what has really been released as a finality, but it pretty much points to an animal encounter." So Jane, who we said was one of the search and rescue volunteers on the K9 unit, thinks it was an animal encounter. Now, Bill Nelson of the sheriff's, the county sheriff's, he writes, "If a cat actually took him, which is what I believe happened, the cat would have taken him someplace and buried him, and with all the activity that was going on, it probably would have left, because we would have scared it away and it would have come back later." So Bill thinks it was a mountain lion attack. He may have taken Jaryd to some spot out, away from the searchers, buried him, and then come back later. I'll get into why I think the mountain lion theory is bogus.
Okay. Which is funny, because I was just about to say I kind of agree with the mountain lion theory, so I'm very happy that that's happening.
Okay. So your theory is mountain lion.
I do believe mountain lion. And just because I've gone hiking in Colorado where I'll look up, and even though they're afraid of people, if they get up at an altitude and they have the high ground, they won't go too far. Because I've gone hiking at night on trails, and you shine your lights up and you can see eyes pretty darn close. It freaks you out. And they're just watching you. You're too big to attack, but they're just kind of hanging there.
Yep.
So what I'm thinking is perfect storm situation. They are getting hits on that mountainside. Yeah. It could be a mix of the dogs literally going after either the smell or the cat.
Yep.
And some miscommunication or confusion due to the helicopter crash that they didn't actually search that area. Now, I'd say my wishful thinking, just for people's sanity and the adults and stuff, it's possible he got attacked and dragged up there and he was long gone, as far as he passed. And I would say he was, he's so small by himself. I see him getting picked off by a mountain lion and not surviving the ordeal, which is why they heard maybe what they thought was a scream. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that wasn't him and it wasn't painful. Maybe it was quick, but I feel totally got taken by a mountain lion and they could never find it. And they just, like you said, it was tucked away in that crevasse. Yeah. Kind of like an area where a mountain lion might hide, a fresh kill. Yeah. So that's where I'm leaning. And so tell me why it's bogus.
So this is a direct quote from Alan, Jaryd's dad. He said in an interview, "I hear constantly about a mountain lion. Yes, when they've tested Jaryd's clothing, there was no mountain lion hairs, no DNA, no blood, nothing on his clothing. The clothing was sent to the CBI, which is the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The clothing was tested by the CBI. No mountain lion hairs, no blood, nothing on any of the articles of clothing." He goes on to say, "If a mountain lion would have attacked him, they would have gone for the stomach area. His jacket would have been in threads, but his jacket was fine." He was told this by several mountain lion experts. He said his jacket would not have survived a mountain lion attack. His shoes that were found up in the mountain, as told by investigators, do not look like they were in the wilderness for 3.5 years. He writes, "The other interesting thing about the shoes is you would think they would be scuffed up if he had been dragged up the side of a mountain. His pants were found in good condition with only rodent and bird marks from animals using it for nesting material."
Okay.
So,
yeah, that does poke a lot of holes in it. It really does.
And it gets stranger. Alan, it gets weird. Alan goes on to say, in one of the reports, a person says, "The reason why we didn't find any DNA or blood or anything on Jaryd's clothing was because he or something removed his clothing before he was attacked.
See, and okay, so before you said that, and I'm not lying just to make it sound like I'm smart. I was almost wondering if, like, because he's 3, if he's wearing a diaper or pull up, or he wasn't and he wet himself. And I know a lot of my kids, when they were younger and like they'd have an accident, they just take their clothes off and throw them.
Yeah, I mean,
so you could imagine. Okay, let's go on this theory real quick, and then I'll let you jump in and tell me I'm wrong. But imagine he soils himself.
Yep.
And that could potentially keep animals away for a significant period of time from messing with the clothing.
Yeah. It wouldn't explain why he would take his coat off.
No, but that you're talking 3-year-old kid. I have a 3-year-old right now that does very odd things with clothing regarding bathrooms.
And, he could have gotten hypothermia, and just because he's 3, I mean, I'm assuming he would still have that urge to, feel hot and want to take clothing
like your
off.
Survival instinct kicks in at some point, like where you're autonomous. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's strange. So it's strange that one of the reports even mentions that they say he or something took his clothes off before the attack happened.
So they're convinced some sort of attack happened. They're just confused at why the clothing was not affected by the attack.
Yeah, and they say that because there are so many hikers on that trail, they said the mountain lion would have had to drag Jaryd's body 500 feet up the side of a cliff, which some people find a little far-fetched. They don't think a mountain lion's going to go through that kind of effort to...
Yeah, they'll abandon the kill and try and come back later.
So, the dad was asked, more questions about this, and he goes on to say, if something took his clothing off before he was attacked, why was it found 500 feet up the mountain? So that is another very interesting point. I could see one thing, his clothes were removed 500 feet lower, and then his body dragged up the side of the mountain. But his clothes were found 500 feet up the mountain. Yeah. But his clothes don't show any sign of being dragged up 500 feet, up the mountain.
Yeah.
So that's really bizarre. Like, his shoes should be scuffed up.
No, yeah, you're right.
And his shoes weren't even tied. So in reality, his shoes would have fallen off long before he got 500 feet up to where his remains are found.
Yeah, and then if an animal was using the shoes or carrying them, they'd be chewed up from that animal.
And experts told his dad, they said his pants were found inside out. He goes, I was told by mountain lion experts, mountain lions don't pull clothing off you, especially your pants, and leave them there.
Well, and even if they are, they'll shred them. Yeah, so that's kind of what made me lead to my example if he might have removed his pants.
Yeah. So that's a possibility. I mean, I guess he maybe somehow he climbed 500 feet up himself.
Who knows?
Alan, the father of Jaryd, he says, myself and my family feel strongly that there is someone out there who knows a little bit more than we do.
Their gut is that there's foul play?
Their gut is that there's foul play. Somebody either... Now, he didn't call anybody out. I mean, and I read a lot of the police reports. I didn't put them in the notes here, but the police interviewed everybody.
Okay, I was gonna say, yeah. So they weren't like, I was gonna say, like, there weren't somebody that they left behind that could be an actor.
Yeah, they talked to everybody. They talked to everybody in the church group. They talked to everybody at the resort. They talked to everybody just driving by in their cars. So they talked to everybody, and they had no evidence to believe that any of these people were involved in his disappearance in any way. So you gotta take them for their word that, my first inkling was, all right, it was the fisherman, or maybe there was somebody in the group, the 11, adults did something, but you would have, it just doesn't seem likely that someone in that church group would have, seen something if one of those people had abducted him.
Yeah, and I started going down kind of the path, like, okay, maybe like an accident occurred and they tried disposing of it and saying, like, oh, he got lost. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the media had a lot of crazy theories.
Of course they did. Sounds like they ruined half the freaking search.
Right? Yeah, so, they thought killed by a predator, fell behind boulders, and died drowned in the river, which makes no sense because...
They found all of his stuff up on the mountain.
Yeah, so there were theories of abduction, even strange conspiracy theories. Yeah, investigators questioned everyone from Alan to members of the Christian Singles group to the fishermen who were presumably the last to see Jaryd. They talked to Alan's ex-wife, who was living in San Diego and came to Colorado after hearing Jaryd was lost. No red flags after talking to anybody. So, a truly
Jeez.
bizarre case. His official cause of death was, they said it was something like, they didn't know, but they think it was a mountain lion. That's not the official way they wrote it, but that's kind of what they said. So everyone is kind of leaning on, the mountain lion attacking him.
I think it's weird. There's a lot of weird circumstances. I'm strongly for the mountain lion theory. It wouldn't be uncommon for the mountain lion to attack him and then take him to his spot, and then a lot of the remains to wash away. And that's where I'm wondering if there's a weird, again, there's no logic in a 3-year-old's mind. So something made him take his clothes off, his jacket, whatever. Because they didn't find a t-shirt, right? They just found his shoes. So he could have been wearing the t-shirt still. He took a jacket off.
You'll see in the pictures, it looked almost like a pullover.
Okay. But they didn't find underwear or, so here's what I'm thinking is and I'm just going off because this is what happens with my kids when they're little, would wet themselves. So he wetted himself and took his jacket off to take his pants off because if it was kind of bulky, and then got taken away by a cat. And they found and maybe he climbed up there a little bit and his shoes weren't on, and they got scattered around over a 3-year period of time. That doesn't explain why they're in pristine condition and why nothing really happened to the clothing. I don't have an answer for that, but that's the only thing I can think of that's reasonable. That's a logical explanation that doesn't involve foul play. And then the ones that do involve foul play, it's weird that the stuff was left out there, I guess.
The thing I'm really having a hard time grasping is how he got up 500 feet to where his remains were found. I could see...
Yeah. I mean, that's no small task.
I could believe it
for an adult.
They found his clothing just shredded up, blood on it. I could see that, but the fact that his coat, or the fleece that he was wearing was, it wasn't new, but it looked fine. And the shoes were literally hadn't been out in the woods. So it's bizarre. We'll never know.
Did they, when they found the shoes and stuff and they said it's kind of tucked away, was there a big overhang over it? Is it possible that it wasn't being weathered normally?
No, it wasn't like a cave or anything. It definitely would be covered by snow.
Okay.
And it was just kind of obscured from aerial view. So,
okay. So it wasn't easy to see from a helicopter, but it still was exposed to the full elements, not protected in any way.
For sure, yeah. And it, even the pants, like they mentioned, were, birds and rodents were kind of picking pieces away for nesting, so they were kind of exposed. I feel bad for the dad. You read the interviews with him, and he's just wrecked by this, even to this day. I mean, he has a little closure finding the remains.
It's still that idea of not knowing would just be horrible. So what's your theory? Did you even say your theory? I don't think you did. I think you're skirting around without having to say anything.
I think it was foul play.
You do. And do you have no idea who it was? You just think it was foul play, or do you have someone in mind?
I don't have anyone in mind. I mean, the law enforcement interviewed everybody. I think there's a third party that was not known to the people hiking out there that abducted him. And it's the only thing in my mind that makes sense. I don't know. I mean, a mountain lion attack seems very reasonable, but like I said earlier, they're very rare fatalities from mountain lions. There's only been 14 of them since, I have the stat here, 1915 in the US and Canada.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's definitely new news to me.
Yeah. So they're extremely rare, and think of how many times little kids are hiking out in the woods.
Yeah.
and there's only been 14 fatalities, and these are reported fatalities,
Sure.
so there could be some that have gone unreported. So yeah, it would make sense, but there's too many weird facts about the case with the clothing, and why was only one tooth found on top of the log? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, like where did the rest of them go and what? Yeah. And there's some weird people out there. I can like hang on to
And
the
what's
side of
with
your
the-
train. I'm
Yeah.
not going to get fully on it.
And the skull cap thing, finding just the top of his skull doesn't make any sense to me either. You would assume if a predator was, consuming, this is grisly to talk about, but consuming somebody, that they're not going, you're probably going to find pieces.
They find lots of bone fragments at these sites. When an animal attack has happened, it's very messy, and there's lots of evidence essentially left behind.
Yeah.
And that's why people who are experts kind of can say this is not normal, because they are used to seeing, even though it's rare, and it's not just the lions, it's any animal, or if someone perished and an animal was feeding on them.
Yeah.
It is a messy scene.
And even, several years later, the predator isn't going to clean up after itself.
Yeah.
They're going to leave, bones will be left in the area. And, I don't know.
All right.
I that's my theory. I wish I had more to it. I think it's human related foul play. I'm with Alan. Alan and I agree. So, well, that concludes another episode, Joe. Anything else before we wrap it up?
No, I do not. Thanks again for tuning into our show. We appreciate all of you for listening and sharing Locations Unknown with your friends and family. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. We also have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to for the show as well. We don't have video on there, but it does play the show audio with the cover. So if you listen to it on YouTube, you can do that. If you'd like to support the show, as we said in the beginning, check out our Facebook store. We got some cool swag there. Otherwise, you can donate to our Patreon account. Just search Locations Unknown. Just remember, when enjoying the beauty of nature, whether backpacking, camping, or hiking, remember to leave no trace. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.